If I had to sum up the Legend of Zelda series in one word, epic is the closest description and the first word that comes to mind. But it's so much more than that. This video will be the first in a series covering each main entry of The Legend of Zelda. A retrospective, if you will. I'll be playing each game through again so it's fresh on my mind, and I'll be critiquing the ins and outs of the game with gameplay analysis, an overview of the narrative, its strengths, its flaws, what makes the game tick, the influence it had on the evolution of future installments, and of course, the legacy it left behind. So without further ado, this is the original Legend of Zelda, a retrospective by Hyrule Fantasy. Legend of Zelda, the OG, the game that birthed the legend, and spawned 19 other main series games as well as several spin-offs and character cameos over the last 30 plus years, leaving its legacy literally legendary, and growing into one of the biggest game franchises ever. Today, The Legend of Zelda is a juggernaut, but it all started with one game in 1986 in the little 8-bit world of Hyrule. Released in North America on the Nintendo Entertainment System and created by game designer Shigeru Miyamoto, The Legend of Zelda featured groundbreaking game design and concepts that would go on to influence not only future installments in the franchise, but the entire gaming world. The original Zelda is an action-adventure game that features one of the first open-world concepts. Right from the beginning, you're dropped in the world of Hyrule with no instruction or suggested direction. This is one of my favorite aspects of the game. Fans of the series today are used to a more linear design in their Zelda games. An open world was one of the core concepts that the series broke away from early on, and that's not a bad thing. Having a linear structure, I think, was something that helped the series evolve over the years, especially adding to the lore and story elements that we've grown to love as Zelda fans. But an open world concept creates barriers when trying to develop a narrative, and that's why The Legend of Zelda pulls it off. The story is relatively simple. Following the title screen, there is a short text crawl serving as a prelude to Link's adventure. It tells the story of how Ganon kidnapped Princess Zelda in an attempt to steal the Triforce of Wisdom, and how she split it into 8 pieces to keep it from him. Now Link must find the pieces and save the princess. There is no interacting with the story at all. You're just dropped in front of a cave with a sword, and from there, it's all on you. You could tackle dungeons in any order. You could explore almost every inch of the map from the start. Some of the more recent entries in the series get a bad rep for holding your hand too much and giving you too much information. Well, not this game. If anything, this game can be a little too cryptic, offering the most vague hints or none at all. Don't get me wrong, I love that about this game. But I've heard too many gamers offer their opinion or review on the original Zelda, and they express that without a guide or prior knowledge about certain aspects of the game, it makes it near impossible to figure out some of the game's secrets or even key details that are required to progress. And I just straight up disagree. I used to play this game as a child, and I had no strategy guides. There was no internet to look things up, and though it took me a couple years, I eventually found my way to level 9 and defeated Ganon as a child. I may have got a few hints here and there from a friend, but that was Miyamoto's intention for this game. He wanted it to be a social experience, for you to share your uncovered secrets and breakthroughs with your friends, and it made your discoveries that much more special and exciting. It feels like a true adventure wholeheartedly. Now, I'm not saying the game doesn't have its flaws. It does, and I'll get there. I just wanted to share my opinion and experience in The Legend of Zelda's defense on that matter. I just recently played the first quest all the way through for the first time in 10 years, and it was just as captivating as I previously remembered. From the opening screen, you hear that legendary score written by Koji Kondo. This Hyrule Overworld theme has got to be one of the most recognizable songs in all of gaming. It just bursts with excitement and adventure. This theme is so iconic that each entry in the series features some sort of rendition of it. The music is such a big part of the Legend of Zelda series. It really immerses you into the world of Hyrule. And if you're a longtime fan, it definitely gets your nostalgia flowing. The opening title rendition of the theme actually almost didn't exist. Originally, they were going to use the classical piece Ravel's Bolero, but Nintendo didn't realize that the song was just 1 month short of becoming public domain. So Kondo had to whip up a song in one night to make the deadline, and we ended up with this classic masterpiece. And it stayed with us in some form or another throughout the entire series. In fact, this game featured several concepts and game mechanics that would become series mainstays, such as its advanced inventory system, iconic items like the bow and boomerang, musical instruments, secrets, puzzles, dungeons. This game laid the foundation for a lot of things that today are just traditionally Zelda. So let's talk about the dungeons for a second. The dungeons compared to the other games in the series are more combat oriented and less puzzle based. Progressing through the dungeons was focused more on traversing a labyrinthian maze and overcoming challenges as you advance in the form of varying enemies. And the combat in this game is much more challenging than its successors, partly due to its age and the limitation of its time's technology. Link can only move in the 4 cardinal directions, and instead of swinging his sword, he would stab straight forward. Taking on a full room of dark nuts and trying to dodge the projectiles the statues are shooting at you proves to be extremely difficult with these limitations. But it's not hard to adjust once you've tackled these challenges a few times. Puzzles come in the form of blowing up a secret wall that leads to a room not marked on the map, or pushing a lone block after you've cleared a room of enemies to unlock a sealed door. Simple, but these concepts would evolve into the intricate, thought-provoking puzzles we'd see in future installments. But on the other side of that coin, you would often stumble upon NPCs in secret rooms and dungeons, find them tucked away in hidden caves scattered throughout the overworld, who would offer riddles or hints that you could categorize as one of the game's form of puzzles. But most of the dialogue is so obscure, and even if you can piece together the clues they provide, it's often only part of the information you need to figure out what you're supposed to do. For example, in Dungeon 6 you can find the old man offering a clue to the location of level 7. He simply states, "There are secrets where fairies don't live." He's referring to a screen that features a pond, and when you use the whistle, it drains the water, revealing the secret entrance to level 7. Now, normally in the overworld, if you find a pond like this one, you will meet a fairy who restores your health. So after thoroughly traversing the overworld, you may figure out that this must be what the old man was talking about. But the problem with that is, who would think that the whistle, which on every other screen in the game transports you across the world, is the key to unlocking the secret? Now, after trying to bomb the walls or burn the pond or find a secret path through the rocks or use every item in your inventory, eventually you may use the whistle if you haven't given up and thought you're mistaken about the screen. And so you see, it's not impossible to figure out, it just might take some time. And unfortunately, this is quite common in this game. Some of the game's crypticness can be blamed on poorly executed translations. But I also think some of these obscure puzzles are intentional. In level 7 you can find a lone gorilla who states, "Grumble, grumble," whatever that means. Now what you're supposed to do here is feed him with the food you've hopefully come across in one of Hyrule's secret shops. Because if you haven't, there's no way to progress, and there isn't even a vague riddle to help you figure this one out. This is probably the worst puzzle the game throws at you. So you see, it's one extreme or the other. Either you're pushing a block and clearing the room of enemies, or you're trying to decipher the old man's hints that are overly cryptic for cryptic's sake. Luckily, the series' future entries learn to find some middle ground. But really, those are the only gripes I have with this game. There are other issues that are commonly brought up when talking about the difficulty or the flaws of this game, but I never had any other problems, even when I was young. If you're thoroughly exploring Hyrule in the dungeons, a lot of the equipment and items you come across will greatly diminish the difficulty. Sure, if you're on level 7 and haven't obtained the blue ring, or gotten any of the sword upgrades, or heart pieces, you're in for a challenge. But if you've acquired 2 out of the 3, it definitely evens the playing field. And that's part of the greatness of this game. The freedom you're allowed allows you to set your own difficulty. That's why Breath of the Wild tried to recapture the essence of this game, because there's nothing like that feeling of freedom and discovery that open world games seem to offer. You want the whole experience, the best items and all the upgrades? Great, You want to tackle the hardest dungeons with nothing but your sword and your dexterity just to test your skill? Fantastic! You get all of that and more with Zelda 1. The other Zelda games still nailed that Zelda vibe, but it's like they sacrificed some of their freedom, or in some cases lots of it, and filled the void with a more structured game, with rich lore and amazing story narratives, which in addition to this game, helped form the foundation of Zelda's legends and lore. But at the core of it all, Legend of Zelda's freedom and discovery made you feel like you were on a true adventure. And I think the original Zelda, Breath of the Wild, and A Link Between Worlds for the most part, are the only Zelda games that fully capture that essence, because they have that open world philosophy. Z1 may not tell you what to do, where to go, or whether or not you're doing the right thing, but it subtly teaches you and guides you. In the beginning of the game, notice if you venture towards later dungeons. Obstacles and enemies are more dangerous and hard to deal with when Link's ill-equipped, but the easier Octorok enemies inhabit the areas around the first couple of dungeons. And the game might not outright tell you that you can bomb walls, but it hints at it in the instruction manual. And if you missed that, eventually one of the dungeons locks you in a room and one of the enemies is carrying bombs. After defeating them, there's no way out, but the map shows a room to your left. So through deduction and a little bit of critical thinking, the game has subtly taught you about bombing secret walls, if you hadn't previously figured it out. This game, while maybe not held so high by today's standards, was incredibly advanced for its time. It was one of the first to feature an inventory system where you could hold several items and assign a weapon to a button. One of the first games that was so big you couldn't beat it in one playthrough, so you'd have to save your game. One of the first to use a battery to save your game instead of using passwords. One of the first to feature optional items that you could just skip if you wanted. But you wouldn't want to, if you could help it anyway. And they were especially helpful late in the game, especially the magical key. Death Mountain can be a nightmare to navigate without the magical key. Death Mountain actually doesn't provide you with the same amount of keys as there are locked doors. And there's dead ends. This was never a problem for me. I know there's dead ends and unnecessary repeat boss battles that you can go around, and shortcuts via bombing walls. So I usually have extra keys saved up from past dungeons. But if you're someone on their first playthrough, not having the magical key can cause you some grief. Before I get into level 9, the infamous Death Mountain, I'd like to mention that each dungeon's boss battle does a pretty good job at matching the difficulty to each dungeon as you advance, until they start to recycle them. But despite that, the variety is pretty good, and the game does a good job of giving them distinct traits, strengths, and weaknesses, making each battle a fun and unique experience. Aqua Mentis is a perfect first boss, introducing the concept and making it challenging at a novice level. The Dodongo is pretty easy, but if you come ill-prepared or lack the knowledge of how to defeat it, you could find yourself locked in a room with no way to damage it. Manhandla can be challenging with just a sword. As it takes damage, its speed increases. It's faster than Link and moves unpredictably, but a well-placed bomb can even the playing field. Leok, in my opinion, is the toughest boss. You'll have to dodge projectiles while trying to strike the beast on its head. The four-headed version can be especially troublesome, being as you defeat each head, it flies around also shooting projectiles. Digdogger and Goma are honestly relatively the easiest. The challenge comes from having the knowledge of how to defeat them. The old man offers hints, so if you pay attention, there should be no problem at all. Now, Ganon can be a force to be reckoned with, if you're not properly equipped. But if you've searched level 9 thoroughly, it helps prepare you for this fight. But that's easier said than done. Death Mountain is by far the largest dungeon in the game, and the path to Ganon is anything but straightforward. There are several passages hidden and in plain sight that take you from one side of the map to the other. A variety of enemies inhabit this labyrinth, from the weakest to the dreaded Wizrobes. Many bosses in the form of older dungeon bosses, as well as a new enemy called Mantra. And he's quite annoying. This final crucible can be quite the ordeal, so you'll want to make sure that you find the red ring and the silver arrows before facing Ganon. The red ring serves as a defense booster, which will come in handy by the time you get to Ganon. Usually, when I reach him, I'm more than half dead, but luckily they put a potion shop right outside the dungeon. I always need to refill before I face Ganon. I know, a bit excessive. Anyway, So, Ganon fights cheap by shooting fireballs at you and remaining invisible while teleporting around the room. Not really a fair fight, but what did you expect? It's the Demon King Ganon we're fighting. So you'll have to stab randomly at the air, hoping to catch him. Eventually, after you've damaged him enough, you'll have to shoot him with your newly acquired silver arrows to finish the job. If you miss them on the way, you'll find yourself locked in with no way to defeat him. So after you've dealt the final blow, piercing him with the silver arrow, he'll turn to ash and you can finally claim victory, picking up the Triforce of Power and saving Zelda and all of Hyrule. You'll find Zelda in the next room where she'll dub Link the hero of Hyrule, and the credits roll. The game offers you a second quest that rearranges the map and the dungeons, and it's ridiculously cryptic and difficult. At least compared to the first quest, but it's just a bonus, so if you're craving more Zelda 1, it's a nice little reward for beating the game. So all in all, Zelda 1, though not perfect, was a spectacle of its time. It laid the foundation for one of the most innovative, successful, and critically acclaimed video game series of all time. The developers knew they had something special with The Legend of Zelda. They even packaged it appropriately in gold, as if they knew how important this game would be to gaming, and the many games and series it would directly influence in terms of concepts, game mechanics, and legacy. This game is an amazing and unique experience, and many of us still hold it close to our hearts. Today, The Legend of Zelda is a juggernaut, but it all started in the little 8-bit world of Hyrule. Thanks for watching The Legend of Zelda, a Retrospective. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe so you don't miss any new Zelda content. See you soon.